Hello and welcome to No Half Truths, Inside Out, Pura Sach with Raghvendra Singh. We have with us a well known historian called William Dalrymple. William is a Scotsman who has written quite a few books on India, like White Mughals, on Bahadur Shah Zafar, on the East India Company, and his latest work, which has created quite a ripple, is called The Golden Road: How Ancient India Transformed the World. He compares the Golden Road with the Silk Road, and he talks about the transnational cultural linkages which India had right from Afghanistan till Java, and in the north across China into Korea and Japan. So we have for you, ladies and gentlemen, William Dalrymple, and he talks about his book, The Golden Road. Why did you choose the word Golden Road?
I was trying to come up with something which would be a counterpart to the Silk Road. The Silk Road, though I argue that it doesn't exist before the time of the Mongols in the 13th century, it's such a well-known concept, and it's such a clever capturing of a historical era. It's such a romantic notion, camels swaying through the deserts over the Pamirs, which is why it's been so successful, despite having absolutely no historical evidence for its existence before the 13th century. And why you have carpet shops, hotels, exhibitions named after it. It's a very clever little coinage. And I like the fact that the Golden Road is equally neat and short. But it describes, in a sense, two different things. It's obviously got echoes of the Golden Road to Samarkand and the poetic nature of that. But it specifically refers to the way that India was the drain of all the gold from Rome, as mentioned by Pliny. The drain of all the precious metals in the world is what he actually says. And how my theory is that with the collapse of Rome, India pivots eastward and then starts looking to Suvarnabhumi, the lands of gold,
Yes.
and Suvarnadvipa, the island of gold.
Obviously, what you've done in your book is to have pegged for people to think that, for the first time actually, that, you see, this is something which runs counter to the Silk Route. And over a period of time, it will gain currency. Therefore, it must have been in your mind to think of yourself as British Sven Hedip.
You're very kind to suggest that. I was more worried about getting a title that was both attractive and
Yes, no. I mean, that was.
But certainly it is nice as an author. It's very nice if you create terms which become put into general use. Yes, White Moguls to a certain extent has done that.
Absolutely.
And I'd be very pleased if people were to use this term. But let's see, it's early days here.
Is this book meant for mainly Western audience, or is it for the Indian, or is it for both equally?
When I began writing about India, books like In Xanadu and City of Jinns in the 1980s, I very specifically had a Western audience in mind, as that was where I was published. I think City of Jinns was the first of my book to be published by an Indian publisher at all. There was no Indian edition of In Xanadu. And I had in my head very clearly a Western reader, and therefore would be explaining things about India which Indian readers would know, but Western readers would not. But from the time of White Moguls, I think the majority of my readers have been in India. Certainly the largest sales of my books when they come out have been from as long ago as 2002, been India. So I very much consciously write for both now, and which creates problems because you occasionally you do worry about how much you need to explain. For example, a term like the Kushans, something that every Indian probably knows, even the outlines of it, but no one in the West will ever have heard of the Kushans. So it means you do have to do a bit more explaining. But yes, no, I mean, my books, I'm very lucky. My books are bestsellers in England,
Oh, yes.
and in Australia and Italy and India occasionally, briefly in America. We're going out to launch this one there next month, so we'll see.
So, taking a cue from there, um, one gets a feeling as an Indian reading the book that you introduce Alexander, and with Alexander, you introduce India to the world, meaning that Alexander, this is the feeling one gets, discovered India, so to speak.
I think that's not right. No, I mean, what I open the book with is Ajanta. And the opening chapter is about the Buddha, and Alexander doesn't appear till chapter 3. So no, I would resist that notion. The Buddha is a very useful character because obviously he's someone that everyone in the world has heard of. Alexander's a rather minor figure in this book. I'm surprised you say that.
For the reason because when you say that Alexander came and then when he returned, you talk about the vacuum being created, and in that vacuum you find Chandragupta Maurya coming up and filling the vacuum. That's the reason why I asked this question, whether it was meant for a Western audience or an Indian audience. That for Chandragupta Maurya to fill up the vacuum, he would have to actually traverse all the way, which of course is called the Uttar Path, something which you really haven't mentioned in the book. And therefore, for the Western audience is what I call it. He would have to go all the way to nearer Peshawar to sort of try and fill up that political vacuum.
Oh, I would resist that notion. Alexander appears very tangentially in this book. The main characters in the first 2 chapters are the Buddha and Ashoka.
So on the north, it is the Buddhism, and on the southeastern side, you choose to call Brahmanical Hinduism, which I personally would much rather term it as Sanatan Dharma. Now,
I use both terms, in fact.
Yeah.
I use that term as well as... I think Sanatan Dharma is an increasingly accepted term in India, but it's one that's not at all known outside India. So you immediately limit the comprehensibility of...
my question is that are you saying that Buddhism was a missionary religion and therefore it managed to spread out, but it was the Kushans, and one gets the feeling that the Kushans came in as the foreigners? Whether we go from the Afghanistan side, then it is thereafter the Chinese who do the spread of Buddhism, and then it goes to Japan. So it's completely out of the hands of the Indians.
Again, I would not accept that, not at all. The reality is that our main source for this period is a Chinese source, which is Xuanzang. And therefore, Xuanzang's account is so extraordinary. In fact, it's then backed up by his biographer, Hugh Lee. So we get this double first-hand account. I mean, it would be wonderful if there were more accounts from India at this period, but they're not there beyond the notions that and in general, often it's not unique to India that a foreigner coming into a place, wherever it is in the world, will describe the obvious everyday things in a way that people living there will not. You will not describe, your journey to work every morning when you were a civil servant. But a foreigner arriving in Delhi for the first time will be astonished by North Block and South Block, by the Parliament building, and so will give an account of things that you would take for granted. And that's just one of the realities of historical material, is that travelers often leave accounts that are fuller than people that actually live in a place.
If we in India undertook to do research, so unless and until there is a link getting created, strong links, good research work, perhaps restoration, and in a way where, the link up is symbiotic. It's not as if, they were a colony and we were sort of trying to dominate them. No, nothing of that kind. But would this help, this kind of research work, if someone undertook? So would it help is what?
So two answers. First of all, to answer your previous question, I think there are many Indians who are responsible for the waves of Indian influence that go out. We don't have the names of characters like Xuanzang who did this work. So, occasionally there are missionary monks or figures who turn up in the records in China, for example, the court astrologer, who has the very Indian and very Buddhist name of Gautama Siddhartha, who is the court astrologer in Wu Zetian's court in Xi'an. But we know that tens of thousands of Indians were traveling both upwards to Bactria through Afghanistan and the northern route to China, and by the sea route from Tamaulipas down the coast through the Malacca Straits. And we know that from the descriptions, again, of Chinese ambassadors, we know that large numbers of Indian Brahmins, none of them named, but clearly there in large numbers, and we have images of them as well as written descriptions in the Chinese sources. So there is this way in which the meteorology of India at the center of the monsoon wind system, blowing out in one direction for 6 months, coming back for 6 months, has always meant that Indians are a people who go outwards, and they could spread their ideas as well as their trade, as well as their culture, as well as their religion, as well as their art, their science, their mathematics, in all directions. And my feeling when I was writing this book was that while there's a fantastic amount of scholarship, much of it from India, on all these matters, they tended to be siloed. So the Buddhist story often gets told only by Buddhist scholars, often in connection with China. It had become absorbed into the history of the Silk Road, in inverted commas, and into Chinese studies. The story of the Sanskritization of Southeast Asia and the whole contested story of the Indianization of Southeast Asia, which is a matter of sort of nationalistic discussion in many Southeast Asian universities, because they obviously don't want to imagine their high culture of the past to be merely an Indian import. And so we have this disputed legacy of India, which I think has been much underrated. So it's been siloed. So the Buddhists talk to Buddhists, the Sanskrit scholars talk to Sanskrit scholars, the historians of mathematics and science talk to their people. And my attempt with this book was to bring it all under one roof, to bring in all these different forms of scholarship. And that's also the reason, incidentally, that a third of the book is footnotes. And
Yes, Ajib, you're there. Yes, I'm more than a third.
yeah, and so it's very much intended to be a starting point for further discussion and scholarship, and to allow other people to take this baton forward. But what I was feeling very strongly was that there was a great deal of scholarly material gathering in scholarly journals, which only academics were talking about, and had made no impression whatsoever on the general public, unlike the Silk Road. I mean, last year, for example, in London, there was not one but two exhibitions of the Silk Road. The British Museum, an enormous Silk Road exhibition that would, of course, curated out of the Chinese department of the British Museum and sponsored by Chinese corporation, which almost totally ignored India, whether deliberately or otherwise. I think that's hugely unfair. I think India was the dominant cultural and economic force at that period. And I'm glad to say that actually this year, the British Library is putting on the reverse show by two scholars, Shushma Jansari of the British Museum and a wonderful character from Singapore, Tamil, called Suresh. Who they are curating an exhibition based partly on this story. So we are going to have the Indian point of view for that.
So you did mention Sanskritization. You don't use the word Sanskritization when you talk of Buddhism. Now, Sanskritization, to my mind, and people who've also been students of sociology, is more of a modern concept in sociology, which brings in caste mobility and dominant caste.
I would again see it more as a matter of linguistics. It was Sanskrit, of course, is a language, and there is
this has a different connotation. The moment you mention Sanskritization, we start thinking in terms of hardening of the caste rules, which
is certainly not how I use it in this book. There is this moment in the 6th century when Sanskrit moves from being a religion solely for sacred ceremonies, used in temples by Brahmins for sacred matters, in the 6th century, suddenly it becomes a language which is used in public inscriptions for a whole variety of different purposes, both public and royal and administrative. And that spreads in an extraordinary way all the way up to Kandahar, to the northwest, and to the southeast as far as, well, Java and Bali.
Yes.
So what I'm talking about is the linguistic spread, and with it a whole cultural movement, which is largely Hindu and involves a package which involves Hindu kingship, the renaming of the landscape in many cases with Sanskrit terms. So to this day, you go across Southeast Asia and you come across names like Kurukshetra or Ayodhya. Ayodhya, just outside Bangkok, there's a Kurukshetra in Laos. Many of the great Shaivite shrines have this in India. Have given their name to other Shaivite shrines in Cambodia. And even the Mekong, the central river of Southeast Asia, is arguably Mar Ganga, according to one etymology. It's just a Khmerization of Mar Ganga. So I certainly use it as not in a sociological way. I'm not a sociologist. I'm using it in a linguistic way, but also as part of a wider package of cultural transference. And that it's just a fact of history that you find Sanskrit inscriptions cropping up over a vast area for a period of 600 years.
But in the process, the Vedic age, so to speak, when Sanskrit actually developed without the script, and the whole Shruti form of literature and the Smriti form of literature and all our Mahakavya, which actually forms part of the Indian ethos and also forms part of the people who are Buddhists in our country. It still does.
Yep.
Because that's governs our relationship with our father, mother, sister, brother.
Absolutely.
So those things are termed animistic. They're termed tribal, as if they were part of a system which was being propitiated by the Brahmins on the top. My sense is that the Rigvedic or the Vedic age, when the Shruti...
Are you talking within India or in Southeast Asia?
No, within India. So the moment you talk of that, Buddha was rebelling against it, etc. I find that Rigved and other Veds are highly philosophical, and a lot of our music comes from there. I mean, the way we chant. Of course, Sanskrit, the way Sanskrit is developed out of Rigved shloks. It is also part of history. Vedic age is to us a very sophisticated age,
Of course.
and Sanskritic studies that you talk of under the Sanskrit sun. A major part of the day in which the Sanskrit sun was there was during the Vedic day.
So my story, I should say very clearly, is the story of the diffusion of Indian ideas out of India. If the Vedas had more of a journey out into, say, China or Korea or Japan, I would have been writing a lot more about the Vedas. But my story is about those elements of Indian culture which leave India and flourish elsewhere. That's the subject I've taken. Therefore, I discuss that means, I discuss zero and Indian mathematics, which clearly travels westwards. I discuss the Buddhist texts, which clearly travel right through Asia. But the only place that you find the Vedas, the Puranas, and so on traveling is to Southeast Asia from the 5th and 6th century to about the 12th century. So I've devoted 2 chapters to that, but there would be much more it just is a fact that Buddhism got further than Vedic Hinduism. It's a fact that Buddhism got to Siberia, Mongolia, the Philippines. It traveled for whatever reason, and it's an interesting question to ask why this was so. But and also, why not the Jades? Why did the Jadeism not travel?
No, I ask you this question because while asking this question, I came across an answer which is partial to this question, and that is that, you see, anytime this happened with Buddhism, it was a push, which was a kind of a foreign push. So it was the push by Kushans. Of course, the initial push, as you say, comes from the patronage of Ashoka.
So my line in the book, and my belief is not that it was so much pushed by the Kushans, it's that the Kushans opened the paths to the north. Previously, you have a hostile boundary between Gandhara, say, and the lands beyond in the Taklamakan and the Gobi.
Yeah, the stability
and so on.
The stability.
The Kushans create an odd-shaped kingdom which starts in Urumqi, goes through Kashgar, Khotan, through Ladakh, Kashmir, through to Mathura, and possibly as far as Varanasi.
I don't know whether
so what you have is that while the Kushans are coming in from the northwest, they open the passes to Indian Buddhist missionaries who go out in the opposite direction.
Yes, yeah. But since Buddhism could go in and Hinduism could not go in, is the reason because Hinduism was not an evangelizing religion, meaning we had to be born a Hindu to sort of.
Well, that was clearly not in the case, because we clearly have examples in inscriptions of kings in Southeast Asia who embrace Hinduism, who are not born. So we have the case, for example, on an inscription outside Jakarta, which is now in the modern National Museum of Indonesia in Jakarta, of a man who gives his father's name as Kudunga, but who calls himself Mahendraraman.
Where is he in the Varna system?
So this is a crucial point you brought up. So he is clearly a native Southeast Asian who has taken on this new faith, taken on this new language. According to the inscription, he sacrifices an improbable number of cows. Now, as this is in Java, which has no history of cattle herding, the inscription goes already into territory beyond necessary straightforward fact. But it's a crucial inscription because it is a rare glimpse of someone who clearly comes from a different background, who is embracing Hinduism for whatever reason, and embracing the Brahmins and embracing Sanskrit, the whole package of Hindu kingship. Now, when Hinduism and Hindu kingship and Sanskrit spread throughout Southeast Asia, they spread in several ways which are very different from what we come to expect of Hinduism in this country. For example, there is absolutely no sign of caste. Secondly, we have clear inscriptions in the Royal Angkor temples of women Brahmins, absolutely unknown here. We have clear images of the royal cooks cooking pigs and eating pork, and the royal kitchen serving beer, according to the inscriptions. And there are other things. For example, there's a wonderful picture which I included in my book of an image of Jayavarman II, who's one of the very first founders of the Angkor dynasty. He is shown with a discus in one hand and a conch in the other. Now, there may be examples which I don't know of in this country of a king showing himself as a deity, as Lord Shiva or Lord Vishnu. But from my experience, when an Indian king wants to show himself associated with a god, we have Raja Chola standing beside Lord Shiva, or whoever. But I know no example from my experience of an Indian king withholding the accoutrements of a god and implying that he is an incarnation of the god. So there is this elevation of the king into the Devaraja in Southeast Asia, which is clearly something which is not happening in India. So it's very interesting. So Hinduism is
Tell me why Hinduism couldn't go into China and from China into other places and Buddhism did. What according to you is the reason?
Looking at the specifics of the inscriptions that we have that hint to this, such as the Kudunga inscription, which is crucial because it shows that it's not an invasion. It's not that a new people are arriving and setting themselves up as Hindu kings. It's the locals turning religion and inviting Brahmins in to do the Abhisheka ceremony on them. We have images of that. That is also the image given by the Chinese ambassadors from the period. We have 4 or 5 good accounts over 300 or 400 years of Chinese ambassadors reporting, to their surprise, how these areas in their immediate vicinity, I mean Vietnam, which is just half of Vietnam was within China in the 7th century. And yet they describe in southern Vietnam that you've got all these Brahmins turning up, that the king has taken a Sanskritic name, he's surrounded himself by the whole paraphernalia of Hindu kingship. And this is a surprise to the Chinese. They can't understand why it's happening. And I think the answer is one has to, from the evidence, assume that it is a pragmatic thing whereby the kings are increasing their authority. If you are the friend of Lord Shiva or the friend of Lord Vishnu, blessed by the Brahmins.
You told me about Southeast Asia. I'm talking about, via Afghanistan into.
So we do have many Hindu kings in Afghanistan. And we have whole Hindu dynasties and the Hindu Shahis based in Kabul, quite as late as the 9th century or the 10th century. And we have examples of Indian Brahmins living in China in the court. But I think it's the small courts of Southeast Asia that are the ones that I think seem to gain most. The idea that there's no moment in history, for whatever reason.
It is because of the way Hinduism is structured that it finds more difficult and go to another place and create a social system which is completely.
You have it in Cambodia. You have it in half of
in Cambodia. Had it. It evolved and no one forced it. And some people just took it by themselves. Here they didn't. Obviously, because perhaps the Chinese themselves have an evolved culture, and because of which
they took on Buddhism.
They took on Buddhism,
which is extraordinary, and it's a unique moment in Chinese culture. I mean, I'm just writing at the moment for my podcast about 19th century China. I've just been talking about the McCartney mission when the British are trying to make some impression on China in the 19th century. But Chinese are not interested. The Chinese are a culture famously. And the emperor tells the British ambassador, who's spent 5 years preparing telescopes and microscopes and every exciting scientific giggle that he can find, a hot air balloon, all these things to try and impress the Chinese. Chinese completely uninterested. And yet, the one example we have in history of the Chinese opening themselves up completely to an outside philosophical system is the
they opened themselves up to this system because it was not a system based on the book.
Buddhism. Yes, well, Buddhism is a very literate religion, and what I think the Xuanzai is doing
is not based on the way the Judaism or the Abrahamic religions and Islam spread.
And I think one of the interesting things, I would disagree with that because, well, firstly, if you look at the success of Hinduism in Cambodia at the time of Angkor, let's say this plainly, the largest Hindu temple in the world is Angkor Wat. The largest Hindu empire in history is the Khmer Empire. It's not the Guptas. It's not the Cholas. The Khmers cover a vast area of Southeast Asia, not just Cambodia, but Laos, most of Vietnam and Thailand. If you look at the kind of Hinduism at work in Khmer culture, it's highly literate. There's one beautiful temple just outside Siem Reap called Bante Saray. And it's built not by a king, but the prime minister. It's unique in being a prime minister. And this guy was the proudest Sanskrit scholar you've ever heard of. He writes on the doorway his reading curriculum for his younger brother that he puts there. It's like a reading. I've been many times to Angkor, and wherever you go, there are always Indian tourists there who are dumbfounded. What is the Mahabharata doing here? They say, what is the Ramayana doing here?
So I'm not talking about these two World Heritage sites. I'm talking about so many others. I mean, and you yourself say that, the poetry, the literature, and what have you, tells that the refinement of Hindu culture is all there. It's the apogee, so to speak.
Yeah.
And here we are really not sort of linking these times, as we really haven't linked the Dunhuang with Ajanta.
So Dunhuang, not only with Ajanta, Dunhuang has very specific borrowings in the art of Dunhuang from the Pallava court. And there's this other character who I write about at length in the book, Vajrabodhi, who's a Pallava prince. Vajrabodhi is a Pallava prince. He's a pupil from Nalanda, and he's sent both as a religious missionary and as a political ambassador by the Pallava king, who is a Shaivite. He sends his Buddhist cousin to the Chinese court.
William, there are far too many questions waiting for you.
You've got your Ruchi expression on again, Raghvendra. I'm always worried when you.
So we have for you, ladies and gentlemen, William Dalrymple, and he talks about his book, The Golden Road. He, in fact, clears quite a few myths. No half truths. Inside Out, Pura Sach with Raghvendra Singh. For such interesting conversations, do encourage us, press the bell icon, and do subscribe to us. Thank you.